Okay, members, we now move to item 5 on our agenda, and that's the corporate plan delivery plan for 2023-24. I will now ask the officer to briefly introduce the report and then call upon members who indicate they wish to speak by raising the raise hand icon. Thanks very much. I'll pass to Alex Rawlin.
Good morning. Yes, I'm Alex Rawlin. I'm the Corporate Policy and Public Affairs Manager. The Corporate Plan 2023 to 28 was agreed at Council last night. We agreed earlier in the process that we would develop an annual delivery plan to cover commitments, PIs and targets, as we currently call them, and publish that in early summer 2023. So the report in front of you provides some very early thinking and questions about that first annual delivery plan. And the main things I'd like to take your views on today are audiences for the report, the size and style of the report, driving forward the new ways of working, driving forward the new wellbeing objectives and measuring progress on them, existing performance management issues the Council seeking to address, and timescales for the report. So I can either go through each of those sections and then have a discussion, or I can go through them all in one go, whatever members would prefer.
I think we can go through them all in one go, but does anyone have any alternative thoughts? I'm happy. I'm not wedded to the position. Nobody's indicating, Alex, so we'll go through them all in one go, unless Councillor Griffiths wants to come in.
No, just supporting you, Chair, absolutely.
Okay.
Just put my hand up to speak.
Thanks very much.
Okay, no problem. So on audience, my initial thoughts in the report there are that the delivery plan should be resident focused, but not particularly resident facing. The main audiences being council officers for service planning and improvement, elected members for scrutiny and decision making, and regulators and Welsh Government for accountability and oversight. In terms of size and style, we need to balance comprehensive coverage of the ways of working and the wellbeing objectives with a manageable, accessible report. Plans from other local authorities in Wales range from around 2 to about 100 pages, from very simple reports using plain English to highly complex and technical reports. My view again is that we stick towards the bottom end of those sizes, maybe 12 to 20 pages, and that we're able to show a summary, maybe, for example, of 1 page per wellbeing objective. Clearly, the detailed information on specific PIs will be longer than that, but everything doesn't need to be in that overall report. So then on to ways of working, and I've got 2 real main questions on the ways of working that I'd like to take your views on. And there are potential links here with the points you all made earlier about workforce planning and improvement and recruitment. So firstly, how do we drive those ways of working forward? We know we haven't monitored them very closely in the past, and we have had them in previous corporate plans, and we want to make sure that we do so now. So how do we want to do this? Do we want lead officers for each one? Do we want scrutiny deep dives on each of them? Or should we develop a programme of projects to support them, which we monitor, for example, through CPA? And then secondly, how do we measure them? Most of those ways of working don't lend themselves very well to developing performance indicators, although some, and where they do, for example, on customer service and on HR processes, as we've raised earlier, we would highlight those opportunities. On others, we might need to focus more on commitments and projects. So, for example, the communications peer assessment we're about to do, or the development of the long-term workforce plan. But how then do we demonstrate and really show that? Then on to the wellbeing objectives, and this one's quite complicated because we're trying to do more than one thing with it. So we're trying to develop a measurement framework for the corporate plan, but we're also trying to address some of the problems with the existing performance framework. And we found those issues and problems, for example, through our corporate self-assessment last year, which had commentary on performance management and where we gave ourselves an adequate rating. We have had an Audit Wales review of performance management at the middle of last year, which is coming to Governance and Audit Committee next month, that you'll be able to take views on. And we're also undergoing a performance indicator audit at the moment by internal audit that we should receive the findings on quite soon. And they've all identified issues, quite key issues in those reviews. They're in your report, but they include things like PIs, which as a whole don't fully represent or measure the wellbeing objectives, imbalances between commitments and PIs, a lack of outcome-focused PIs, and things like lack of performance information that we can benchmark across Wales. And some of those can be addressed by the performance framework we come up with in the delivery plan. So it's proposed, for example, that we have requirements and criteria as we're developing commitments and PIs. So we try and make sure we are fully focusing and covering on each wellbeing objective, that we want clear objectives and key results with commitments and PIs that support them. We have a sensible balance of commitments and PIs. We have PIs that can be compared with other authorities and over time, and we have baselines and targets on those where possible, not reams of indicators that say baseline to be set next year, for example. And we have a better balance of input, output, and outcome measures. So the chair asked me yesterday to put together what I thought this might look like, and I can show that now. Can I show that now? I've not actually joined the meeting. I've not even joined the meeting. Share.
You might need permission from.
I think I've.
Got that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just zoom in a bit. So this is what it might look like if we developed something like the OKR. You guys talked to us about the OKR version of doing things last time we came to COSC. So for example, there you've got a wellbeing objective there on the left, and we've agreed those, happy days, they're set. The detail or aim section, which is next to that, is currently those bullet points in the corporate plan underneath each of the wellbeing objectives. We don't have to use those. This is just an example of how we might put it together. So those commitments and projects there are already also agreed in the corporate plan, so that's also relatively fair enough. And then performance indicators there. This is a project that one of the graduates in my team has done, looking at other local authorities' PIs, national PIs and milestones in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and existing BCBC CPA indicators. So you can see there, we've just done that sort of mapping exercise. We've put different things against different, we don't need to go through that in detail. But I suppose my reflections on that are, firstly, we might need a few more aims. So you can see there that we haven't got an aim on justice or community safety, and we have got commitments and performance indicators against it. So you might want to balance things to reflect that. But secondly, and the really key thing here, and I suppose this reflects those comments of Audit Wales, there is quite an imbalance on some of them between commitments and PIs. So some of those aims have got reams and reams of potential PIs and no commitments. Others have got shed loads of commitments and no PIs. And I think that being what we've been criticised for in the past, we would probably want to address that imbalance and be really clear what we're measuring at and what we're looking at on each of the aims, if we decide to go with aims, of course. So that's just an example of how we might do it, and even that really early first attempt shows you some of the issues we're facing. And then finally, to timescales. Many local authorities are at a very similar point in the development of their corporate plan delivery plans to us. Lots of people have delayed the development this year due to late budget settlements. And in line with previous years, the Council's performance system will be updated in July following Q4 reporting. So my proposal would be in the next 6 to 8 weeks, we'll do some work with heads of service and with group managers to develop these thoughts in more detail. And then if you're satisfied, I propose a further COSC development session for late April or early May to discuss an early working draft document. And then I could bring the final draft here to your meeting on the 26th of June, if that suits.
Thank you very much, Alex, for introducing that report. From my perspective, I think the report is excellent and a step in the right direction. I know I have some questions from members, so we'll go to Councillor Simon Griffiths first.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to start by saying I think we are making pretty swift and deep progress, actually. And thanks to all the officers, especially yourself, Alex, for pushing this so hard. I do think this is the key to getting BCBC to deliver against its objectives. And I can't really stress how important I rate this particular piece of activity. So thank you very much for all your efforts. And I know personally this is really tough work. What I wanted to cover off really was two aspects, I think. One which is about trying to move from a point where KPIs are backward-looking measures of, well, what happened, and into something which can actually drive our behaviour and the culture within the organisation as well into transformative change. And I think one of the things I would ask you to add to what you've talked about so far is to look for those opportunities when we can identify measures which can cause a transformation to happen. When you have lots and lots of measures, it's very easy to miss the key points and to focus on ones which really don't encourage change. I think where we have a goal, as you correctly pointed out earlier, where we have a specific goal, what are the one or two measures that really will drive our behaviour to that goal? And associated with that, I think there are two different kinds of measures that are most important here. One which is around business process measures, which we can internally look at how our business processes are running. And the second family of measures are around customer experience measures, which are, well, what is the end user? So in a commercial sense, it's customer experience. Here it's a resident's experience. So what is that first touch from the resident, and is the outcome a positive outcome, and was it done in a timely manner? So I think those are the things that we can really focus on amongst all of this noise of PIs that we have. So that's, if you like, the first point. And really, it's only a request, Alex, as you go forward to think about those things. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was around the support that IT and modern tools can give to any performance management framework. I think the earlier that we can engage with IT and get them to be involved in the process of selecting a tool and moving from a document-centric approach of PDFs and even Excel and Word into a drillable set of measures that when you see a red at a very high level, you can drill it down and say, okay, well, why is it red? What's the reason for that particular thing being red? So I would encourage us, as part of the delivery plan, to bring in the IT aspect of that. And I think the final point is to support that IT point of view, which is the more we can get to what I would describe as a canonical description of the measures, which is having similar meanings across all of the measures. And I think you touched on this already, Alex, and this is really, really tough to do. But where it's read in one directorate on one measure, having the same sense that it means the same thing as read in another directorate is absolutely key to us getting a consistency of approach across the whole organisation. So those are the three things really about. One, which is trying to find those transformation measures. Two, moving to a canonical approach with IT support. And then the third one, I've actually forgotten my thread already. So, that's three things I've forgotten. So apologies. But I hope that makes sense, Alex. It's not really a question, but it's really a set of suggestions about things to think about to add to the list that you have there.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. I think they were really useful suggestions. And just to build upon that, objectives and key results, Alex, you will know, often provide that much needed direction and context against key performance indicators. They set out what we want to accomplish and describe how we're making progress. Because I suppose key performance indicators at any one time just provide a snapshot of where you are. And while they're vital to track elements of the organisation, and I think we should have that trend data, as I was rehearsing with colleagues earlier on, you can have something which is rated as red or amber, for example, and you could be in an improved position in comparison to the previous quarter, whereas in another directorate you could have a amber, which is a deterioration in a particular directorate. So I think it's tracking that trend data. But as Councillor Griffiths mentioned, while KPIs are kind of health metrics, I guess, for where we are as an organisation, I think the objectives and key results are more important milestones of future success, which we need to incorporate within this particular document. And I couldn't agree more with what Councillor Griffiths has said there. I know Councillor Walter also has a contribution, and I'll invite you to make a comment on all of them, if you may.
Thanks, Chair. Really just building on what Councillor Griffiths said about having measures or identifiers that are important to the residents, our customers. And whilst I accept that this is the document is focused around wellbeing objectives, an example might be if we were to go out and ask residents what the 3 things they care most about on, say, recycling. They might come up with that their recycling is collected on the day we said it would be, that there wasn't lots of rubbish lying down the street afterwards, and that they can get their replacement bags on time. You know, that's not necessarily measures that we as an authority might want to set out, but they're probably the ones that our residents would want us to be measured on. So I'm just, so as I say, building on what Simon said, thinking we need to find room to put measures in place that are directly in the face of and relevant to residents if they were to build measures themselves. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Walter. Alex, would you like to pick up some of the points that we've all made?
I think only really to say that we'll build that into the development in the weeks ahead.
Great, thanks, Alex. That was succinct, which I always like. Just to note, though, you did ask, I think, on page 32 for recommendations on how to best drive new ways of working. Do you have you developed a preference at all as yet? You've identified potential ones as having lead officers for each one, or undertaking scrutiny deep dives. Have you identified any preference at all, or based on your research from other organisations, or are you genuinely open-minded to what we think is best? I don't think we've necessarily come to a conclusion, but perhaps members can correct me if I'm wrong.
We found very little evidence of anyone measuring them at all. You know, people generally have these sorts of principles sitting in the background rather than actually measuring them. You know, as we thought about this, there are more and more performance measures for them. You know, the ones that we talked about today in terms of recruitment, there are performance improvement plans, for example, for asset management. After the Audit Wales report earlier in the year, there will be one for performance management following their report that's coming to GAC next month. So I suppose there are performance indicators for things, and there are projects going on things. Maybe the next step for us could be to map those things that are already out there and think about how we might measure them, where we might bring them for scrutiny, and bring that to that next session in April or May.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think that would be an appropriate way of moving forward. Do any members have any other thoughts on that, or are you content for that to occur? Mark Shepherd would like to come in, Chief Executive.
Just building on that, and I'm actually quite taken by Councillor Walter's point, actually. I think one of the risks, and it's striking a balance, isn't it? One of the risks is trying to measure everything, because what you end up with is, sorry, Chair. Oh, what you end up with is potentially an industry, really, in terms of collating and trying to measure everything, which in itself is intensive. And my experience is the risk with that, unless you get it really focused, is you miss the point. So you'll end up with 100 measures, some of which are inevitably red, but they won't necessarily be the ones, as Councillor Walter's pointing out, that are potentially the most important. So I suppose I think we should do the exercise, Alex. We should look at it, but I don't think I would be wed to the fact that if we can't find appropriate measures for certain things, I wouldn't go searching for them in a way that we must have 5 for this, or we must have 10 for that, because I just think it tends to create something that we will struggle to complete and make meaningful. I'm actually taking my Councillor Walter's point, really. Let's try and focus on stuff that actually is important and people recognise as important, rather than something that, yeah, allows us to tick a box, but probably doesn't add much value.
Yeah, and I think there was consensus over that earlier on from members. Councillor Walter, would you like to come back in on that to provide a contribution?
No, that's fine. I have some experience of this in a previous life. I'm happy to assist if need be in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Walter. That'll be, I'm sure that would be of assistance, and yeah, use members' skills in other walks of life to assist where necessary, Alex, during the development of this. And we look forward to receiving your next report in due course. Are there any other further contributions before we move on, councillors? That was much shorter than the previous items, so thank you very much for keeping that concise, Alex. Thank you for your contributions, members. If there are no further questions, I thank the invitees, and if you're not required for the next report, you may leave the meeting, or if you'd like to stay, you're more than welcome. But now we move to item 6, and that is the Disabled Facilities Grant, Progress Report and Position Statement. I will now ask the officer to briefly introduce the report, and then I'll call upon members to ask any questions by raising the hand icon. So who is taking this? Caris? Yeah, Caris Lord, Chief Finance Officer, will be taking this report. Caris.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I will just give a brief introduction for you, and then obviously we're happy to have any questions for you. This is an update report for members. Members will be aware that we changed our system in relation to the delivery of disabled facilities grants a couple of years ago. The previous process that we're using were not delivering the outcomes that we wanted, but more importantly, they weren't delivering the outcomes that residents deserve. Therefore, when this new service was planned, you'll see in the report that certain risks were identified at this time. And what this report this morning does is update you in relation to each of those risks, where we are, whether or not they've been fully addressed, but also a timeline with regards to when some of these will come into completion. So there have been delays in implementing, and we fully acknowledge that. And the reasons for that are outlined for you in this afternoon's report. And we do acknowledge those, and the details of why we've had some interim arrangements in place and why some of those are continuing and some are not are also in the report for you. I think it's important to note that some of the key pillars that we need in place now to get this system up and running, we have dates against those, and the work is being prioritised to make sure that we do deliver within those timelines. So really, I've got Martin Morgans is here with me to take any queries. We've also got Lynn Berry on the meeting as well. So if members have got any questions or queries, then we're more than happy to take them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Caris, for introducing that report, and welcome to Lynn and Martin. Can I ask members for any contributions? Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered, could we perhaps, we've had Mr. Morgan here now twice in meetings giving us factual information regarding the situation with disabled grants. Could he perhaps indicate how many people are still waiting for grants within the time frame of the office, not allocated the grants? And I've had one actual person say to me that they were still waiting 14 months for a grant. Now, I can't understand why they're waiting that long, unless there's some problem with that grant, right? Where they're asking questions internally of it. I don't know. Or is it an outside body that we are dealing with is not done it right to submit the grant to us? So I think we need an explanation regarding that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Granville. Martin?
Thank you, Councillor Granville. In terms of the questions, in terms of the monies, it's not external monies around the DFGs. It's a capital budget we hold within the authority. I'd like to take offline that specific use case without, speaking out of turn. I haven't got the actual data in front of that specific use case where they're struggling for a grant. But there's a level of complexity around with all DFGs. So a DFG can range from low-level access shower replacement, an extensive ramp construction to a low accessibility alongside stair lifts. And then you have the more complex ones then which would involve extensions, which subsequently involve planning, etc. So the process is quite a arduous process in terms of getting that. The understanding, the model we've actually adopted now since 2021 is where we take full autonomy end-to-end, Councillor Granville. So the recruitment of contractors, our DFG officers will essentially manage that end-to-end, where previously, under the old model, we were just a grant distributor. But then when there were issues relating to that specific DFG, we would be called into the council. So I was in a situation where I couldn't guarantee the level of expertise in terms of deployment of that DFG build out. So that's why we have changed that initial process from that perspective. The other issue, as the report has highlighted, we had the COVID pandemic, which obviously put a freeze on the amount of access to persons' homes, which was a significant issue. So we lost a significant amount of time where people were waiting. Alongside that, you'll see highlighted in the report is staffing issues. To bring the service in-house, we advocated we need a team of surveyors or DFG officers to support that process end-to-end alongside the OTs, which are within the Social Services Directorate. And we've had, as you heard this morning in terms of the HR meeting, significant difficulties in staffing. And sometimes we've been running with 1 and 2 staff alone within a context of a team that should be 6. I'm positive today at this point. We have got a full team, albeit we are utilising agency staff in some of those roles, which is not great, but we need to have persons there. So we've had some significant issues in terms of staffing to support that. And then alongside the COVID pandemic, we've got the cost of living crisis, which has driven inflation, etc. So we've had to reassess a large number of our DFGs in terms of the cost, because the cost profile has gone up significantly. So we've had to go backwards to go forwards from that sense. So that's why we've seen a longer duration and a number of DFGs taking some time at this present time. Obviously, with the new framework we're going to be developing and going out to tender, that will give us that end-to-end in terms of ownership and with those particular contractors, which will make this system far more sort of streamlined from that perspective. So I've just highlighted, Councillor Granville, some of the issues we've had and experienced and where we are from that perspective. But I'd like to take that one specific one offline and from yourself, and I can look into it for you.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Granville, are you content?
Yes, thank you. I think just to come back on that, there are other issues, Martin, I think we need to look at as well. When we put in the grant money into houses, that is to cost houses where they can't put in different things within that house because they're not a brick house. They're pre-profile houses. The people are not getting what they're asking for. And I'm going to give you an example now. I'm sure the people that I'm not going to mention names, but this person had a leg off. He's in a wheelchair. He's had all the internal grants done, yet the external door to go outside the property, they couldn't put it on there, right? So he still can't get outside of his house. So it makes a fundamental joke of what is happening. And I think officers need to really get a grip with this because it's affecting people's lives. But I don't want to go into it too much now, Chair. But I think what I will do is have a private meeting with Mr. Morgan to discuss certain things that I know that perhaps we can sort out. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Granville. The Cabinet Member, Councillor Good, would like to intervene now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that, Councillor Granville. I think, we all appreciate the difficulties that are faced by individual residents, and, I think he'll appreciate that everyone in the team does everything they can to make sure that we are giving as much help as we can to individuals who need it. As Karis and Martin have already said, I think we all accept that the DFG system hasn't been where we wanted it to be, but work has taken place to
change that and to reform the system, and I think we are making good progress on that. So I appreciate his frustration, and I appreciate him raising those issues for his resident, but I'd ask him to give us a bit more time, but we will get this sorted as soon as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Good. Martin would like to come in again.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Just specifically on V2C, V2C have autonomy now in terms of adaptations to their properties. So they've got a fund which is called PAG. So essentially, any adaptations to social housing within the V2C sort of stock, the responsibility is with that provider. That particular issue there sounds absolutely ridiculous, and something we need to pick up with V2C from that perspective, that if you can't facilitate access out the door, what's the point of adaptations? But on the point of an adaptation, it's not about what the citizen wants, it's what they require and need. It's a needs-based assessment from our OTs in terms of facilitating them to live safely in their own home and be able to exit. So we've got to be cognizant of the fact we want to use our money wisely, because it's a scarce resource, in terms of facilitating the right adaptations that facilitates the need of that citizen, not what their desires or wants are.
Thanks very much, Martin. Just on you mentioned about small jobs being completed relatively early now. One of the issues I suppose we all face in our respective wards, without mentioning specific cases, is that largely it's the most vulnerable people in society who have perhaps more complex and larger scale needs, which are suffering perhaps from the longest delays. And can I just ask what you're doing to perhaps introduce more of a triage of cases in order to prioritize those cases whereby they need support very early? Because you mentioned within the report that, and you're very honest within your report that, the service isn't where you want it to be. You have a target of, I think, 240 days, but we're at 320. I know you're doing an awful lot of work to improve that, as you've already mentioned within the report and your introduction. But what kind of thing have you done to introduce some kind of triage process whereby you can prioritize those more complex cases among those who are perhaps the most vulnerable disabled residents within the community?
I think some of the work we're doing at the moment, Councillor Williams, in terms of is better relationships within our organisation. So we've established really good relationships with social services in terms of the OT. We actually have an OT that's a housing-focused OT. And the vulnerability you talk about is a situation that does arise. So we have a priority basis in terms of where needs are prioritised and identified by the OT. Then they will be obviously dealt from that perspective in terms of where they sit in the chain. So we do prioritise based on need on that aspect. The difficulty is around, as you suggested, is the larger adaptations will require planning, etc. So by having the autonomy end to end in terms of that DFG officer working solely with their OT alongside our planning, we can ensure the right steps are taken for us to proceed when we engage them with the contractor. The contractor engages with us at that very early start, so it enables us to really reinforce that what we want to intend to do, we can do, but we do have a triage system in terms of determining risk and need and priority.
Okay, thanks for that reassurance, Martin. I'm conscious of the fact that I think Councillor Tim Thomas, you need to leave at 12:30, don't you?
I'm going to try and crack on a bit longer.
Okay.
1 o'clock at the best. I think I can just hang on to.
Okay. Yeah. I was just thinking perhaps I would introduce you before Councillor Amanda Williams, because I know she's got about 25 questions. But if you could stay a bit longer, I will introduce Councillor Williams because she was before you.
I'm happy for Tim to go first, for Councillor Tim Thomas to go first.
Oh, that's very generous of you, Councillor Williams. Okay, Tim.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Williams, Amanda Williams. That's very generous of you. First thing, I agree with your points, Chair, about some of the more the adaptations that for more profound needs. I've got many cases in my ward where people need quite major adaptations. Martin has mentioned about the differences between minor and major adaptations. That's cleared that up quite sufficiently. My understanding is that in Wales, DFGs can be awarded up to the value of £35,000. That's a lot more generous than in England and Northern Ireland. Scotland has some other complex system. I'm interested to know, what is the council's policy should they need to top up the DFG? Because that £35,000 should cover most adaptations. But for example, widening doors, doing structural improvements whereby, maybe, for example, a wheelchair user may need wider access. That is a very expensive job. And these jobs are only going to increase with the current climate, isn't it, really? So I'm interested to know, what is the authority's policy on topping up DFGs? Secondly, if I may, I'm interested to know, particularly in the social housing sector, what happens to the adaptation once the tenant moves out or sadly dies? What is done with that adaptation then? Thirdly, I think it'd be really interesting. I don't expect anyone in the committee to have this data to hand, but I was wondering if we could have a breakdown of DFGs awarded by tenure over the last couple of years. I think that would be really useful to see where the money's going. And given the challenges that we have currently with DFGs, I wondered if we could consider a more strategic approach. And I wondered if what our data resources are like for DFGs. Do we, for example, have a database of adapted properties in the county borough, so housing services can signpost disabled and elderly tenants to the relevant properties, regardless of what tenure that may be? Final point, they're the questions. The final point, though, is that this does look like a service that has quite profound challenges, and it, with your, I'm not going to make the recommendations, but I think it clearly needs to be revisited at a later date, in maybe a couple of months, but that is up to others to decide. But if I can have those 4 questions answered, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Martin, please.
As you rightly said, Councillor Thomas, the DFG funding is £36,000, not 35. Just to put that on record, we generally find that we don't exceed that value. You're looking at a circa average around about £12,000 in terms of the DFGs, and the work you described in terms of widening doors, access, etc. That's part of that process and would be facilitated and looked at. So when our surveyor goes in, they analyse whether you can actually do those adaptations, because there's some situations where you just can't. So it's not right in terms of that building. So there are facilities. We tend to find the children's DFG potentially could over exceed that £36,000, but we can use the RPB in terms of some funding streams to add some top ups from that perspective. But we haven't found to this date the necessary needs to do that yet. But there's a channel to top up by the RPB, so the Regional Planning Board, in terms of that top up piece. In terms of the social housing sector, and unfortunately if someone passes away and adaptations are there, obviously, our Common Housing Register outlines in terms of persons' needs, where they want to be in terms of location, etc., and that'll be looked at as an option. But we don't specifically signpost persons on the housing register to properties, because there's a queue, as you can imagine, some significant numbers in terms of our housing register, reaching 2,500 residents at this moment in time. So from that perspective, we've always dealt with, we want to facilitate a property as a roof and a home for someone, and we will adapt that property when need. So we'll do it on that basis, rather than specifically you ring fencing properties that we might not be able to fulfill that need for that person. So we don't run a database in terms of adaptations, because generally what we do find when adaptations go in, people do live there for relatively long periods of time safely, and that's the expectation. And you do want people to live in their own home. So we don't run that perspective. In terms of the other question, I think that's linked to your strategic resource around the actual database. I think I've alluded that we don't manage that from that process. And what was the final question, Councillor Thomas? My writing was a bit.
That's all right. I think I asked. I'm not sure if you've addressed it. The first one, well, there's 2 bits that I'm not sure have been addressed. The data over the last couple of years for DFGs awarded, broken down by tenure.
Yeah, right. Sorry about that. Yes, I haven't actually got that data with me, but that's something we can work on. I can give you some generic figures into over the last 3 years. We've invested £4 million per annum in terms of £4 million over 3 years in terms of DFGs. And then on the minor adaptations, we're talking such as grab rails, etc., using Enable, and that supports a hospital home. We invested £600,000. So, it's quite a considerable money gone over the last 3 year period. So, talking circa £4.6 million in terms of facilitating and keeping people within the borough safely in their homes. But we, as you see in the report, we transition into a new IT system. The difficulty at the moment, we've got data on paper, we've got data in legacy systems. So from April the 1st, we'll be transitioning all our data, we're normalizing that and bringing it across, and that will give us the ability to do richer PIs as well as better reporting. And so the aspects you're talking about, we'll be able to make it a lot easier for us, and also that engagement piece about engaging with the citizens, because we have that digital system in place.
Can I just come back, Chair, on one point, really, just to clarity? The point that I made about what happens to the adaptation once the tenant moves out or dies, I didn't quite clearly hear what you said on that point, I'm afraid. But what I was getting at, I have heard some really dreadful stories, not of this authority, I might add, but of other authorities, of just ripping out the adaptation and scrapping it, basically. And I think that's an enormous waste. But I accept that perhaps if a new tenant moves in, they may not require that adaptation. So, for example, this is especially the case for things like massive stair rail and things like that. But yeah, just a bit of clarity on that. Then, what happens with the big major adaptations when tenants move out?
So, sorry, didn't hear me. I'll put my head closer to the microphone. So, in terms of the adaptations, we don't. As we have the housing register that identifies needs in terms of location and needs as a person in terms of living in that home. So what the housing officer will do, if it comes up as a nomination, we'll look for a list and see if we got available persons that selected that area and it requires adaptations. In the event that they don't need the adaptations, then we would be a removal. But we've got significant number of. I think my microphone's coming in and out. Is it? Can you hear me okay online?
It's okay. You do have to make a bit of an effort to speak near the mic. I think you've got a dodgy mic there, Martin.
I think I have as well. Shall I just move to a different mic?
Just 1 second. Martin is moving to a different desk in the chamber. Yeah, Councillor Good has been kicked out of his seat, so.
Is that better? Yes. Okay. So I'll start again, Councillor Thomas. So we don't actually keep a database or in terms of adaptations, but when someone is nominated for a property and they do have adaptations, then we'll obviously they can take advantage of that specific. But what I was referring to, all our adaptations are based on the needs of that person. So and the first priority, and you understand the issues we've got in terms of housing stock, availability, 2,500 residents on our common housing register. We don't have the luxury of keeping homes back available, so we've got to utilise what we've got to facilitate that need, because we have a priority list. So from that perspective, if the adaptation is not required, we would have to remove it, or the social housing, so RSL would have to remove it. But generally, we would facilitate whatever their needs are based on their property. So the first protocol is to accommodate that person, and then we deal with their needs as and when via the adaptation route.
Thank you very much, Martin. Councillor Thomas, you content?
Yes, thanks.
Thanks very much. Okay, Councillor Amanda Williams now, please.
Thanks very much. I haven't got 25 questions. You'll be pleased to know I've got 4. So before I start, I totally agree with everything that you've said, Chair, and Councillor Granville as well, with regards to these are the most vulnerable individuals in our society that we're looking at and we're discussing now. I'm one of the BCBC representatives on the board for Progenitor Care and Repair as well. I'm a bit disappointed people like them haven't been invited today to the meeting. I spent a couple of months back, I spent a fabulous day with their OTs out on the road visiting residents who have had adaptations or who are awaiting adaptations. I also spent several hours with their hospital to home team within the hospital, where I met patients on the wards who were waiting for adaptations so that they could be returned home. So I've had a lot of conversations and I've seen it for myself. So I've seen the problems firsthand. My first question is, Bridgend Care and Repair used to do a lot more of our adaptations and the DFGs. And as a member of audit committee last term, I remember the paper coming to us then about bringing DFGs in-house to save money and to look at different ways of delivering the service. When Bridgend Care and Repair were involved with our DFGs, I've looked at a number of newspaper articles. We were an award-winning service. We were fantastic, Bridgend Council. We were getting glowing reports throughout Wales for how we managed our DFGs. So I wondered why, if we've got such a backlog of 300 and odd days to deliver our DFGs, why are we not using people like Bridgend Care and Repair now to help us with our backlog and carry out all of this work for our most vulnerable who've been patiently waiting for an awful long time? So that's my first question, please.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Martin, please.
Thank you, Councillor Williams, for the question. In terms of, I've been running the DFG service, or I had responsibility for the last 6 years. We have not been a successful DFG service. Every CPA I've been to, I've been absolutely hammered in terms of the PIs, in terms of delivery of DFGs. So that started the work process in terms of engagement with Cabinet and colleagues, and what we're going to do about changing this. And the in-house option is the only methodology of giving myself full autonomy in terms of builders, contractors, in terms of ownership and having the relationship, and then snagging, etc. So, for example, in numerous occasions where agents such as Care and Repair would deliver a DFG, this resident, when it comes to sign off, would then put a complaint into the authority, and we'd have to retrofix it with, and essentially with a builder we didn't have any relationship with. So right now, in terms of all the building contractors, they go through our current procurement procedure rules in terms of procurement. So, and that's something what the framework will do, will reduce at least around about 50 days off the process by when we go out to tender. So you're talking, we're currently running a 320, we're down to the 370 at that point in terms of that process. So the DFG service has not been a successful service, and Care and Repair has been one of those agents. And at the end of the day, if I'm going to stand up here in front of council and cabinets and take responsibility, I need to have that responsibility, because I can't adjudicate or manage third parties from this perspective. So it's taken a long time in terms of engaging with cabinet, and this is pre the current council administration in terms of that change. And this is where we are. Unfortunately, we've hit some time lags in terms of COVID and the cost of living crisis and the inflationary costs. So that has hindered us and recruitment and staffing, but we've also put some mitigations in. We initiated a collaboration agreement with Neath Talbot to provide us some short-term resource, which we engage with, and that's completed. And Lynn, who was the group manager for housing, has facilitated a framework agreement to provide additionality in terms of the surveyors. So we're looking to enhance and the programme, but without that autonomy, I can't guarantee the release in terms of the days from a reduction perspective.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Williams, would you like to come back?
Yeah, I'll move on to my next question then. I've heard that one way of speeding up DFGs is to allow an OT to assess the needs of an individual and then go directly to one of our builders, contracted builders. So I wanted to confirm if this is the case, and if this is the case, are we at risk that we might end up having a bill for more than it's actually required? Because if it's between a builder deciding what's best based on the OT's report, have we got somebody in-house who's making sure that we are only doing what's required? Thanks.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So in terms of the new model of delivery, this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to put assurances in terms of our staff managing the process as well as creating relationships with contractors. So in terms of the team, the DFG officer team, which is now fully populated, and the change to the actual working process, we attend site with the DFG officer and the OT as at the same time. If there's a complex build, we'll have the contractor on site. That's totally changing the model. So where previously an OT would just go in and then pass a referral, and then we would have to contact the customer again and go out with the DFG officer, and then we'd have to get the builder, because you know full well, whenever you put a spade in the ground, there's unforeseens, and the builders have that knowledge and experience of that. So we have a tri-party meeting for complex, or bi-party in terms of a DFG officer with the OT, which is a change. And we got that single point of engagement. That officer then will drive through that DFG, and the citizens are a single point of contact. On the previous model, they have multiple points of contact, and as you alluded to, the citizens are some of the most vulnerable. So it's easier to have a face there they know and trust from that perspective. So the sort of safety net, I would suggest, is the fact that the DFG officer is aligned with the OT as well as with the contractor to mitigate those cost differentials. And we have a schedules of work. So we have standard schedules of works in terms of costs for meterage, of tiling, of excavation, etc. So we work to that, and something myself and Lynn are trying to aspire to is to have a schedules of work that covers the CTM area, and we're engaging with Merthyr and RCT to have a standardised cost basis. The difficulty we've got at the moment is that the prices are going where they are, but we're engaging with our partners in RCT and Merthyr to give a streamlined, standardised schedule of works, so that it enables us to have a static cost analysis, as well as the contractors understand what they can get for when they deliver the DFG. So that's our approach. I hope that answers your question in terms of safeguarding the monies.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thanks very much. My next question, and then I've got one more after this. My next question is, I'm assuming that some DFGs will result in residents having to move out of their property while work is done. Is there a delay with some of these DFGs because we don't have alternative properties for them to move to?
I can't give a specific example, but yeah, in some pieces, with extensive DFGs, we would have to facilitate that person not actually living in their accommodation where they approach that. I don't know whether I can ask Lynn to come in, because she's a bit closer to the operational detail in terms of potential examples. Lynn, do you mind jumping on to just give an overview with regards relocation if required?
Yes, that's fine. Hello, for the recording, I'm Lynn Berry, I'm Group Manager for Housing. In relation to applicants having to relocate while the work is done, we don't have a huge number that have that circumstances has occurred, but we are conscious that if it does need to happen, you know, we need to be prepared to move somebody out. So you know, one of the difficulties we have is a lot of our temporary accommodation isn't accessible at the moment. We maybe look at hotels, but there aren't an awful lot of accessible hotel rooms. We also work and discuss with social services as to whether they can provide some accommodation through the respite route, because there is accommodation that's available at times. I know there's a need for that for other purposes as well, but we've got one particular case at the moment, and we're having that discussion. Can we program in the works to match the availability of accommodation within social services, so we can move the individual out, get the work done, and then move them back in? So it is something that we're aware of, but you know, touch wood, it doesn't happen on all DFGs and on that many occasions.
Thank you, Lynn. Councillor Williams, please.
Thanks very much. My final question, although I know that Councillor Ross Thomas has had to leave the meeting and he had a question, so if you don't mind if I could ask his question after mine, because he's left. Mine was about the backlog in hospitals. As I said, I went round with the hospital to home team and I met some residents who've been waiting months and months in hospital for adaptations. not necessarily BCBC's adaptations. Some of them were some of our housing providers' adaptations as well. So I wondered what we're doing to make sure that we are not adding to the bed blocking problems in the hospitals by ensuring that we're carrying out some repairs as quickly as possible or adaptations to allow individuals to be discharged from hospital, please.
Thanks. Martin?
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Following your sort of announcement in council around bed blocking, Lynn and myself have done some work in terms of with care and repair to understand actually these cases. So just to put some clarity around it, a referral is only a referral when an OT from Bridgend County Borough Council actually initiates a referral. So that is the safety net in terms of a referral, because our qualified OTs have the qualifications and knowledge, and that's what we work off. So the DFG team do not work off any other referral other than it's from a BCBC, Bridgend Authority, OT. So when we reflected on the cases that Care and Repair presented, they didn't seem bed blocking from that context where they were a DFG referral. But we do work with Care and Repair via the Enable scheme, and that's what they can facilitate themselves in terms of unblocking those situations such as bed blocking. I think, Lynn, you've got some figures in terms of where we've supported via Enable in terms of mitigation of bed blocking.
Yes, like Martin said, when we became aware of that, the first thing I did was to contact Care and Repair to ask for a list of the applicants in hospital and where the bed blocking had occurred. And I think there'd been, a bit of a misunderstanding, because she wasn't able to, they weren't able to provide me with the cases that were actual bed blocking. What it was a list of people who were potentially making applications for a DFG. So I think that there may be been a little bit of confusion over that. But the other route that we're able to support the hospital to home and that kind of work is through the Enable Fund. Every year, Welsh Government gives the Council a grant to spend on the small scale adaptations that can be turned around really, really quickly. And hospital to home and things like that are really important and part of that remit. So, for example, for this year, there's been a grant of 269,973 that has been awarded to the Council. That will be fully spent by the end of the financial year on the type of small scale adaptations, and we work in partnership with Care and Repair because they're on the ground, they're able to turn things around quickly, and I think that's where we see their skills in being able to do that. So to give you some figures, for the last financial year, all the jobs that are completed are categorised, and we had 206 jobs completed under the hospital to home route from the hospital. There were 124 completions then that prevented hospital admissions. We had 180 jobs completed in relation to sensory loss for people who were suffering that. And then we had 159 completions that prevented trips and falls. So, a significant impact on those small scale schemes, and I think the Enable element of it is a real success. And I think sometimes has the potential to be overlooked in relation to the wider DFG work. But obviously this year, the figure last year, I can't remember what it was offhand, but it was lower, a lower grant level. So for this year, when we get the figures, we expect those numbers to be increased again. And when we have them, it will be reported.
Thank you, Lynn. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, just to come back on that slightly, I didn't necessarily mean it was all Bridgend Care and Repairs involvement in discharges. It was anyone who was in hospital. It might be the hospital OT has assessed that they need some adaptations then. So it was to make sure that we've got processes for all patients in the hospital. Because if you say that our OT has to assess them, if they've been assessed by a hospital OT, do we then send an OT in to the hospital to assess as well, or do we work with the hospital staff on that?
We work with the hospital staff. What would happen is that if a referral is made, it goes into our social services department because they're the ones that provide the expert knowledge in relation what the needs are and what can be provided. So it would go into social services, and what they do with any referral that maybe comes from an agent or care and repair, for example, they do a review then to check that what's on the referral is appropriate, and then it gets referred as normal to the DFG team. So you know, for us, that there will be people in hospital that are looking for DFGs, but I'm not sure that it's the bed blocking element. But it could be, I don't know, I can't talk for all, but we have looked at that element particularly, and we didn't have any information on that.
Thanks. Martin would like to come in as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think as well it's really important to acknowledge that a referral needs to take place within that person's home to understand the viability, and that's where the expertise of the Bridgend OT alongside our DFG office can determine then whether the actual adaptation is right and relevant and viable. So it's understandable a referral could come from an OT within a hospital context of the person needs ABC, but it's about understanding how that person then is going to live and reside in their own home, and that referral as at that point in time in their home is vital.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thanks very much. If I can just ask Councillor Ross Thomas's question now. So there's an echo there. It's gone now. His question, he's had to leave, was, are we confident we know our stock? Should there not be a separate list of properties alongside our RSLs of accessible properties in order to save significant amounts of money and reduce the waiting time for disabled people, please?
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Martin, please.
I think I touched on this answer with Councillor Thomas on reflection that our first priority need is to actually facilitate and provide a home with a roof over that person's head, and then adapt it where necessary. So we haven't got, I know Councillor Thomas alluded to other authorities to take RIP X, Y, Z out. I haven't got specific examples of that, but ultimately, you know, to have a two-tier list in terms of adaptations, we potentially may have accommodation in certain areas that can't be accommodated. So we've always taken the rule in terms of the basis of let's facilitate the accommodation and then make that accommodation fit for purpose if necessary, if you need to do any adaptations.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Bledsoe, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a very quick question for the scrutiny officers. Can I just ask if we have got DFGs on the forward work plan at all for my committee? And if so, which month is it in, please? Are we allowed to ask that?
The forward work programme is at the end of the paper pack, I think, Councillor Bledsoe, and I've just looked at it now, and it isn't on the forward work programme. But if members are minded to put it on a forward work programme or suggest that your committee considers it, then I'm personally more than content for your scrutiny committee to look at it. But I'll defer to other members for their views.
I think if I can just come back very quickly, having sat and heard what I've heard today, I'm quite concerned about some of the issues that are being raised, and some of the responses from officers have concerned me as well, enough for it to come back to our committee if possible, please, for a deeper dive. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm content for that to occur if members are minded to do so, and we can discuss that when we discuss the forward work programme just after this item. So thank you for your contribution, Councillor Bledsoe. Are there any other comments at all, councillors? I just have one further comment on communication, I guess, and integration 4.11 in the packs. It's just to ensure that we manage expectations, I guess, Martin. You know, they are some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. We all have cases on our agendas in our respective wards, and inevitably people are desperate in some cases and do chase their councillors to try and expedite the completion of disability facilities grants and adaptations. So perhaps we can just improve that to a certain extent in ensuring that we keep in constant contact with some of the more elderly and disabled people within our community. And then a general point as well is that as we develop newer homes in partnership with our RSLs, is there any way in which we can ensure that the planning regime takes into account that we need additional adequate facilities, which takes into account the needs of disabled people at the very start of the process, so that new homes are developed with this in mind?
Can I come back, Chair, on that latter point? And Lynn is responsible for our PDP in terms of what our social housing grant is awarded for. And she drives really hard with the RSLs that we make facilities accessible and build in infrastructure we don't have to then put in later or take down. So I think that's been one of the driving forces Lynn has been doing in terms of engagement with our RSL partners alongside Welsh Government, is to ensure we are future-proofing our properties to allow that accessibility. So, I don't know whether you want to cover that anymore, Lynn, in terms of that basis, but, Lynn has been a hard taskmaster in terms of putting that pressure on those RSLs.
Yeah, it's just to confirm that we're constantly pushing the RSLs in relation to increasing the number of accessible properties that are available in all developments. But also we started going down this sort of the route of trying to match needs that aren't going to be met elsewhere with the particular scheme. So we have we've had one example recently where the RSL has adapted the property for a particular family that are on our waiting list. So we're constantly pushing that route as well, because there are people whose current accommodation isn't suitable. They do need more or different social housing, and the only way that that's going to be delivered is through having a sort of a bespoke package on a new development. So we're following that route. And I just wanted to quickly come back in relation to the sort of the information really for applicants. We are conscious that people are vulnerable. It can be a very confusing process for people, and we're talking to the OTs at the moment to come up with a leaflet which they can hand out when they go to the property to do the assessment. They can actually hand out the leaflet which will set out the stages and the expectations, because we do come across cases where people do have expectations that can't possibly be met within the grant, and I suppose they need to know at an early stage whether they prefer to wait for a grant or in some cases prefer to do things themselves. So we're developing that at the moment. Once it's finalised, it will not only be put on the website, but it will be included in all of the discussions that the OT has with applicants, and it will hopefully clear up any confusion and maybe reduce some of the queries we get.
Great. Thanks to Martin and Lynn for the reassurance. Are there any other contributions, members? I can't see anyone indicating, so I'd like to thank all the invitees for their contributions, and if there are no further questions, you may leave the meeting. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, members, I take you now to item 7 on our agenda, which are our conclusions and recommendations. I will now ask our scrutiny officers to do the unenviable task to summarise a 3-hour meeting and our key points, and so that we can make some conclusions and recommendations. I'll hand you over to Jessica now.
Thank you, Chair. The members did have quite a few questions and responses in relation to the first item considered today, which is the workforce recruitment and retention report. If I may just pick up a couple of key points that the committee may want to make either requests or recommendations on. The first point was in relation to the Mayor made the point that he was the forces champion, and highlighted the responsibility and obligations on, I think it was the interview, guaranteed interview, thank you, interview scheme.
And Deb Beek did provide an answer in respect of that the applicants must meet the criteria, but the leader did welcome that it was a good suggestion to try and target veterans, albeit he highlighted some of the reticence of some of the veterans already employed within the authority to share their stories. Just whether the committee did want to make a recommendation that the HR look at and consider how best that they may target veterans for that particular scheme.
I think there was consensus on that. Unless there's any objection, I think we should put forward the Mayor's proposal. The leader seems to be in agreement as well, so I can't see any objection, Jess.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make sure that that's noted as a recommendation. The other area that came up for discussion was in relation to teachers or Welsh language teachers and the particular difficulty in filling vacancies in that respect. Obviously, it was noted that it was also a problem in English medium education, but recognised, I think, that the challenges were greater in Welsh schools. I think it was highlighted that there is a need to maintain the working relationships with schools. But I think Councillor Tim Thomas in particular had said that this was an area that should be a priority area for members to potentially consider. We can pick it up in the forward work programme, but I don't know whether any members wanted to make any particular recommendations with regards to the challenges faced to recruit Welsh medium education teachers.
Thanks, Jess. Do any members have any views? Councillor Tim Thomas, you're still here. Amazing.
I'm still here, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems such a difficult area to recruit for us. I mean, to the west, Neath Patel, but there's more Indigenous, if you like, Welsh speakers in that county borough. So that is where the challenge lies, I think, in the number of Welsh speakers and the number of Welsh speakers who have those specific skills. So given this is such a complex topic, I wonder if this is something we should look at in isolation again, perhaps. I don't know. So
yeah, I think the Welsh Education Strategic Plan, I think, is coming back to Scrutiny Committee 1 at some point in the near future. So perhaps we can amalgamate that into Scrutiny Committee 1's forward work programme, as Jess seems to suggest, and we can ensure that that's encapsulated in that report, if that's okay with members. Yeah. Okay, I'll hand over to Jess for the rest of the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up as well, there was a question whether we were making use of the CCR graduate scheme and how many graduates were through that scheme. Members would have received a response from Deb Beek that they are all our graduates funded from service budgets, and she provided that there are 9 graduates and 1 pending recruitment. She was happy to explore and have more up-to-date information on the CCR, and I think the Chief as well said that he would specifically check where those graduates were placed. I think he believed they were in the private sector, but we can make that request for that further information if members want to pursue it.
Yeah, I think we can obtain that information in writing, that's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Similarly, there was a query regarding the 144 apprentices and over what period those apprentices had been employed. Members did receive a brief response that it was over a period of years, but the exact information could be provided at a later stage. And similarly, in relation to the apprenticeships, there was a question posed as to what percentage of those apprentices had completed their probationary period and how many were still with us at 12 months. It was recognised, I think, by officers that that would be a good measure to look at the first year to ensure that they're employing the right people for the right jobs. But again, that's information that they indicated they could provide at a later stage.
Can I come in there, Chair?
Yes, certainly, Councillor Walter.
Yeah, that question wasn't specifically in relation to apprentices. It was in relation to the workforce. There were two parts to it. Do we have measures as to how many new appointees complete their probation and how many leave the authority within a year of appointment? Thanks.
Great, thanks, Councillor Walter, for that clarification. Jess has made a note of that. Thank you. Jess has just made a note of it, and back to Jessica now.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to move on to the corporate plan delivery plan, but I will pause, obviously, just in case there are further recommendations or requests that members wish to make in relation to the workforce recruitment and retention report that I haven't picked up.
Councillor Walter, is that a legacy hand, or would you like to come in again?
No, it's not, Chair. I would like to come again. It was just whether the committee consider that whether or not we should make a recommendation that a review be undertaken in terms of the recruitment process, particularly around the amount of time it takes from identifying a vacancy to somebody's first day of work, whether we should recommend that there be a review and an action plan developed. I'm open-minded about it, but it was a subject we spent a fair bit of time looking at. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm happy to endorse that if members are in agreement. And if there's no dissent, we can make a note of that recommendation. Thank you for that contribution, Councillor Walter. And of course, it goes without saying that any of the information which you've requested in writing would be helpful, Jess. And no doubt, you know, it's a very difficult task to capture everything, you know, during the meeting. So if anything does come out during the transcript of the meeting, then please do include those as actions or recommendations and requests for information. I think that would be a legitimate way forward. Is there nothing else on that particular report that you've identified immediately? So we'll move now to the corporate plan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so in relation to the corporate plan delivery plan, members will have heard from Alex Rowland that she's already taken away some of the guidance and information that's been requested of her, but perhaps the committee would still like to put it, you know, as a written recommendation to the officers. So if I may just pick up a couple of points. There was 3 points, I think, forthcoming from Councillor Simon Griffiths initially, which was, number one, to move away from the KPIs and to look more at the transformative change. And I think he referenced the business process measures and customer experience measures. Secondly, it was getting the support of IT to move away. I think he mentioned away from PDF and Excel documents to get to more drillable documents that when there's a red identified, that could be looked into far more deeply and quickly. And thirdly, that there's consistency of approach to the RAG statuses that different directorates put to their various items, so there's consistency as to what the red, amber and green means. And I think, Chair, as well, you mentioned the OKRs, that they provide context as opposed to the KPIs being the snapshot of where we've been. And then I think Councillor Walter mentioned, and it was picked up latterly by the Chief as well, that the measures should be perhaps more what residents would put in place themselves if they were being asked, albeit with the caveat from the Chief that we're not to look potentially at too many things and lose the sort of value of having the resident-focused approach to that. The only other element that I picked up from there was I think it was yourself, Chair, asked the officers in relation to how best to drive forward the best ways of working, whether they had any ideas in that respect. And the initial response was that the team had found very little evidence of people measuring them at all. And I went on to mention performance improvement plans, etc. And she indicated that she would be able to bring those to the member development session, which I think she indicated would ideally be around about the end of April. So again, all of those matters were picked up by officers and an indication given that they will be taken forward. But if the committee would prefer, we can put those recommendations formally in writing.
Yes, I think Alex did confirm that she would take all of our recommendations on board in the final draft of the report, which is going to return to us, as she said, in late April, early May, or as a member development session. However, I think it would be, for the sake of completeness, it would probably be best if we did put those comments and recommendations in writing, if that's okay, Jess. Unless there's anything else on that, members, we'll go to the next report on disabled facilities grants.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, there's quite a lot of discussion regarding disabilities facilities grants, and there's only a couple of matters that I've picked up, albeit members may well have matters they don't feel they had full answers to. So I'll hand back to members once I've summarised the couple of points I have. Councillor Tim Thomas had a number of questions, many of which were answered, but I think one that remained outstanding was a breakdown of the DFGs awarded by tenure over the last few years. Members received a response that the team are looking to transfer over to a new ICT system in April. So I'm not sure whether they are in a position to provide that information, but if that is a request for information, then we can ask that information be provided if available and if accessible. And then the other point that we picked up, Chair, is in respect of your final comments really towards the end of items, which was about managing people's expectations, and that you as councillors are receiving quite significant referrals perhaps from frustrated residents who are not receiving maybe timely communications to understand sort of the reason for delays or when there are delays. So again, that may be a matter that, I beg your pardon, Lynn Berry did confirm that they are producing a leaflet with the OTs to try and eliminate some of that confusion, but whether the committee feel that there's a further recommendation in terms of generally around communications.
Yes, I think communications definitely needs to improve, and that the OTs need to keep in touch with their different clients and customers to ensure that they have their expectations managed. Also, Councillor Bledsoe mentioned that she may like to see this as a forward work programme item on her committee, Scrutiny Committee 2, and for it to be monitored on a regular basis. So perhaps under our next item we can consider that. But I'll bring in Councillor Granville, who's indicated he'd like to contribute.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that last comment, could we not put that on the council's webpage as well, please, Chair? Because people are looking for things, they could pick that up on there and read it as well.
Yeah, a good suggestion. I think we can include that in the whole range of ways in which we can communicate with the public. So a good suggestion, Councillor Granville. We'll incorporate that into the recommendations about communications. No problem. Okay, is there anything else, Jessica?
I haven't, Chair.
Anything else, members, at all that you'd like to raise at this stage? No, I don't see anyone indicating. So therefore, we move on to item 8, and that's our forward work programme. I'll now ask Jessica O'Merrill to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. The committee approved its forward work programme at its meeting on the 30th of June 2022 and has reviewed and added to it at subsequent meetings. The forward work programme for COSC is attached as Appendix A for the committee's consideration. The recommendations monitoring action sheet to track responses to the committee's recommendations from the previous meetings is attached as Appendix B, and the tracker is updated as responses are received and circulated and chased. The forward work programmes for the subject overview and scrutiny committees are attached as Appendices C, D and E for coordination and oversight of the overall forward work programme. The monitoring action sheets for the subject overview and scrutiny committees are attached as Appendices F, G and H to track responses to recommendations made at their previous committee meetings or respective previous committee meetings. Chair, I would draw the committee's attention to Appendix A of the COSC, which is the COSC forward work programme, and items that have been added to be scheduled as part of the annual forward work programme, and they will be scoped out and scheduled at the appropriate times coordination with the various officers. But what I would also remind the committee is that obviously to look at and consider any invitees they would like to consider for any of these upcoming items. We've obviously already touched on them, but I have made a note, obviously, of Councillor Tim Thomas's request in respect of the looking at the Welsh teachers potentially in SOC 1, and you've just touched on it as well, Councillor Bletzer's request for DFGs to be looked at as more of a deeper dive in SOC 2. So I'll hand back to you now, Chair, for any questions or comments from members.
Thank you, Jessica. Are there any comments on our forward work programme as Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee? Any other comments because we act as an overview body of the other scrutiny committees? Members, please indicate if you'd like to contribute. All I can say is I would endorse the comment that Councillor Tim Thomas made about Welsh language teachers being incorporated as part of the Welsh Education Strategic Plan, the overview of that when it comes back to Scrutiny Committee 1. I would also endorse Councillor Bledsow's comments regarding a deeper dive into disabled facilities grants and ensuring that is continually monitored following today's meeting. A few other items which I potentially thought that we could put on our agenda is that given the fact that the budget was approved yesterday, we would have noted from our council papers that a number of the areas were indicated as red, which are at a high likelihood or a high risk of not being delivered. So therefore, I feel that it would be a potential corporate risk if they weren't to be delivered. So therefore, one of the principal parts of the budget which were indicated as red were obviously the efficiency savings against school delegated budgets, which was one of the largest budget reductions proposed by the Cabinet yesterday and has been approved by full council. So I believe that we ought to monitor that at some stage during the new term to ensure that that is on schedule. Furthermore, we committed, I believe, in our recommendations and actions from previous meetings that we should look at the lessons learned, I guess, from the cost of living payment scheme rollout, which wasn't exactly covered in glory. And that was as per our recommendation on the at our meeting on the 15th of December. So I think that should be added to our forward work programme. I would invite chairs to comment on their own committees, but I know Councillor Paul Davis has already left the meeting, unfortunately, for other commitments. Unless anyone would like to add anything, I would be happy to devolve responsibility for their own forward work programmes to the relevant committees. But I know Councillor Bledsoe, who's chair of Scrutiny Committee 2, has indicated she'd like to contribute. So, Councillor Bledsoe.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was having trouble getting my mic on there. At yesterday's meeting as well, when the budget was set, I did ask a question about blue badges and the charging there. And there was some confusion because there was contradictory information given from the Section 151 officer and the director of the Communities Directorate, who one said that they thought this might happen within this financial year, and the other one said it definitely would happen. So I just wondered if we could have an overview of that later on in the year, just to make sure that that is on track and it does happen, please. Thank you very much.
Yes, I don't see why that shouldn't be the case. I'm content. Unless there's any dissent, I'm happy for that to go forward. Okay. Good. Are there any other contributions regarding the forward work programme? No. And there's also action points and recommendations out there. Jess, I think we need to review our action log. Was that what you were going to say? No. Yeah, Meryl would like to come in.
Sorry, I was just going to clarify on one of the points that you said, Chair, that the work programmes will go to the committees. They're reported back here, so you have oversight of them. and the actions, but they will be reported to the committees as well. And obviously at any meeting of any committee, the committee can add to the work programme as well. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. I wasn't meaning to say that we had control over them, but obviously they're reported back here for oversight, and these are meant to be fluid documents. They are constantly changing at every committee, and that's why I referred to my comments that we're absolutely happy to devolve matters to individual committees for their own decision making. So I think that would be appropriate, an appropriate measure to take. So we move now, I think, to the action log. Do we, Jess? Yeah, action log and recommendations to see where we're at with any ongoing recommendations and actions which are outstanding.
Yes, Chair. The committee will note from Appendix B, which is the action log specifically in relation to COSC, that there have been a number of historical items from last year that haven't been responded to. Just to provide a little bit of reassurance, I suppose, to the committee that these have been chased on more than one occasion. So we are aware that they are historical, and we aim to update those and get the responses to the committee as soon as possible. Like more to add, really, other than they have been chased. We are aware that they are well out of time, and we'll continue to chase to try and get those responses to the committee.
Thanks, Jess. Councillor Walter, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, I've just realised the time. I do have another meeting, so my apologies, I'll have to leave. But to thank you for allowing me the time to put the questions forward that I have. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much for your attendance and contributions, Councillor Walter. I appreciate it. Councillor Williams, please.
Apologies, I've just poked myself in the eye as well, so don't know how I managed that. Yeah, I'm a bit concerned with some of these. They're going back months and months and months, and I know every directorate is busy, but last year, I think, was it last year before the elections? I think we have previously in COSC said we would be asking for these directors to come to us to answer why they haven't provided the responses. I think it was agreed at a previous COSC, wasn't it? That if there was repeated failure to respond to our requests, they would be summoned to answer why.
Can I just ask Meryl to come in? I'm not sure whether we're court any longer. Are we just court? Yes, we are. Yes, we are court. Apologies. I agree with you, Councillor Williams. I've made this point to scrutiny officers as well, hence Jessica's comments then. For example, on page 53, I think it goes back to June, we don't have an outcome listed there. The recommendations were reported to Cabinet. We don't have necessarily a response. Perhaps we've received it and it just needs a small narrative saying that we have had a response on that. Page 55, for example, is ongoing. What action has been taken. Page 57, there are 2 actions, I believe, from the 5th of September meeting, which require a response and action. And then page 60, on the 27th of October, there's an action which is outstanding. I do agree with you, Councillor Williams. This is, quite a number of months ago now, going back 9 months, and that we ought to have some timely responses to our recommendations and conclusions. Otherwise, they're rendered irrelevant. So I think that ought to be brought to corporate directors' attention, that we would like timely responses to any recommendations and actions accordingly. So unless anyone else has anything more to add, please indicate if you do so. Jessica has one more further point before we close.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's moving on from the forward work programme update. It was just that we'd like to update the committee. It's an announcement more than anything else, but we'd like to update the committee that following a meeting with scrutiny chairs, it's been agreed to trial the change in the timing of scrutiny committee pre-meetings to a separate day. It's felt that the benefit of this would be firstly to enable more time between the pre-meeting and the meeting for members to consider any information discussed within the pre-meeting, and also secondly to reduce the time that members are in meetings on the same day. It's anticipated this will be implemented from the next meeting of SOC 3. The meeting itself is on the 17th of April, with the pre-meeting to be scheduled on a separate day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. This is a trial, councillors, because it was felt that our meetings, especially this one, for example, is always a lengthy one, and to combine a pre-meeting before the main meeting is quite a lengthy process. So it was felt that we would just trial this to see whether it would work. If it doesn't work, then we can revert to the previous model that we have in place, because I know that members are working sometimes and can't devote more than one day or two days to a meeting. So we'll see how it goes, I guess, to see whether it improves matters. Okay, unless there are any further contributions, we'll move to item 9 then, members, and I haven't been made aware of any urgent items of business in respect of which notice has been given in accordance with Part 4, Paragraph 4 of the Council Procedure Rules. So I'd like to thank all members for their contributions today and wish you a happy afternoon and see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks
Chair.
very much.